Today I'm going to share with you a conceptual model that Ruth and I have been developing over the past year to describe how social networks impact physical activity. I don't have time to tell you everything there is to know about the model, but I will tell you a bit about why we're developing it and the key ideas that it represents about social networks and physical activity. And so we know people are social animals and that we're very connected in a lot of ways, but especially in terms of our health and our behavior. And some of the best examples of this are demonstrated in the work that Nick Christakis has done with the spread of obesity in social networks, and also some research conducted looking at physical activity among children and adolescents. And you're going to hear from some of the scientists who conducted that work here pretty soon. Now, despite the fact that people are connected, physical activity interventions still tend to target individuals rather than social determinants such as social networks. And we believe that there are two main reasons for this. First, there seems to be a great deal of conceptual ambiguity and disconnect between a few different bodies of literature that examine sort of the broader interpersonal factors related to physical activity. For example, the concept of social support is often confused with social networks, and those are two different concepts. And there's also a large body of literature on group dynamics, which is sort of my specialty, and another on social networks that have a lot in common, but to date have been largely independent of one another. Second, many of the most frequently used theories and models of physical activity that include social networks or other interpersonal factors upon which interventions and research are based are fairly limited. And we think there's roughly three key limitations in these theories. So first, many of the models are essentially individual level models with a side of interpersonal factors. For example, social cognitive theory makes some assumptions about the role of the environment and in particular social support, but in the end doesn't really address social network level phenomena. Second, several current models include multiple levels of influence that include an interpersonal level, but don't include specific mechanisms between interpersonal factors and behavior. And this is sort of representative in some of your generic social ecological models. And third, current models do acknowledge mechanisms between interpersonal factors such as social networks and behavior, but are not tailored specifically to physical activity and therefore fail to include some of the key phenomena that we know to be related to physical activity. And so to address these limitations and try to move the field forward, Ruth and I have been developing a conceptual model for about the past year or so that does a couple of things. Number one, it adds some conceptual clarity between and unifies some of the different literatures on interpersonal factors, including social networks. And B, integrates concepts from health psychology with those from social network science and our existing knowledge in these areas on physical activity. So I'd like to walk you through a few key aspects of the model, starting with the overall structure. And note here the ecological framework that's sort of inherent in the design, in that physical activity is predicted by individual, psychosocial, social network, and broader environmental factors here. And in this way, the model's intended to show that information and behaviors they cascade across these levels to impact physical activity. So let's start by looking at social networks. And social networks are simply a set of social ties, the smallest being a set of two nodes and one tie in between them. And there are two key components to social networks: the overall structure of the network and the characteristics of the social ties within that network. And we can describe the structure of a social network in several ways, including size and density. How many nodes or how close together are the ties. And overall social network structure has been studied most extensively in relation to health in general, and less so with physical activity. However, there is some evidence that overall network structure, composition, and centrality are related to health behaviors. The main idea being that certain network structures might better facilitate the spread of information or behaviors better than other structures. Now, we can also describe social networks in terms of the characteristics of those ties within the network itself, such as how often people interact with one another, what types of social ties exist, such as family or friends, and measures of intimacy. So, research in this area has found that social integration, which is a function of frequency of contact, related to physical activity levels, is related to physical activity levels, and that the type of relationships you have moderates the influence of other people's diet and physical activity behavior on other people, and that was something that was found in Nick Christakis's sort of neoclassic study of the spread of obesity through social networks. As we move downstream in the model, we come to the content and the psychosocial processes through which social networks impact individuals. And this is where we can see social support, social influence, and something that we like to call network-oriented beliefs. The main message I'd like to communicate here is the difference between these concepts, which we believe has contributed to a very disparate set of literatures within the interpersonal aspects of physical activity. And first, social networks are different than social support. Social networks are a set of social ties and provide opportunities for psychosocial processes to occur, such as social support. And that is, social networks are sort of the structures through which content like social support can flow. Second, social support is different from social influence. Social support refers to the real or perceived transfer of resources from one person to another. Social influence refers to the active and passive processes through which other people impact the thoughts, feelings, and actions of others. And while some types of social influence might overlap with social support, some people have suggested, such as social control, we distinguish them based on their autonomy supportive qualities. So that is, on a scale of autonomy supportive intention, social support can be thought of as being more autonomy supportive, and social influence as being less autonomy supportive. That is, there's likely a higher intent to change a person's thoughts, feelings, or behaviors. And lastly are sort of these network-oriented beliefs, or the beliefs that one has about his or her social network. So we know from a large body of group dynamics literature on physical activity that one's perceptions of his or her group, and specifically the degree to which one feels cohesive and committed to the group, and the group's goals, the more likely one is to adhere to and maintain their level of physical activity. And some of these processes also include other key concepts that largely come from the group dynamics literature, such as group tasks, group goals, and collective efficacy. Now, a reasonable question, given the link between social networks and physical activity, is what determines the structure and the functioning of social networks? And we think there are at least three types of environmental conditions that influence social networks, including social structural conditions, the physical environment, and the social network environment. And that these environmental conditions cascade to impact physical activity. For example, there's some evidence showing that higher neighborhood connectivity is related to higher frequency of contact and connectedness within the community, and also higher levels of physical activity. We also know that certain policies are particularly important for facilitating interpersonal relationships and healthy development of children and their interpersonal skills, such as policies that fund child care, maternity and paternity leave, and early childhood education. It's also worth noting that there are a variety of policies that likely contribute to levels of social cohesion and social capital within communities, likely through their impact on income inequality, both of which are related to mortality and morbidity. And recent studies are beginning to show that this may also be related to physical activity. So we think this model can serve as a general framework to guide research and practice in social networks and physical activity. Ruth is going to talk more about the specific strategies that social network science enables us to use in physical activity intervention. So here I'd like to offer sort of the big picture questions that I think we need to start asking ourselves to move this field forward. Mainly these questions need to focus on the upstream factors related to social networks, and specifically, what are the structure and characteristics of social ties within social networks that support physically active lifestyles? And moving further upstream, how do we create places that support healthy and active social networks? And those are big and challenging questions. It's first of all, it's really hard to acquire data on entire social networks, but with the prevalence of new technologies such as smartphones and mobile devices, it's theoretically easier to acquire those data sets. And second, the data analysis of social network data can be challenging and really needs to move beyond one of the more common methods, which is sort of constructing mathematical models that describe the structure of social networks, to statistical models that determine whether social relationships are actually influencing behavior and also the extent to which individuals are influencing social networks. So, so the key messages here are that, first of all, we think social network theories and methods are underutilized in physical activity behavior change research and practice. We think our model clarifies and distinguishes social network concepts from other interpersonal phenomena, and also reflects our current state of knowledge in the area, and identifies potential targets and methods for research and physical activity intervention.